Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Disc Guidance. Since Zeku is being announced this weekend, we will be doing the main stream for Guilebot 2.0 today. This content will be rebroadcast from the Amara 2_MK channel to our main 2_MK channel with full permission. However, it is just released today, and I'll be going through multiple characters and showing you a little bit more about why this particular character has two bots before Season 3 or Arcade Edition, depending on how you want to look at it. And as usual, with the later bots, I'm also going to show off a little bit of why the character needs to have this rather than just using the CPU. But as always, we'll begin with showing the various recordings of the bot itself and explaining what these are for. As for settings, on the bot side there is no need for meter or V meter. It is a relatively simplistic bot that doesn't use either of these things, but that's fine because it's meant to demonstrate the sort of player that actually doesn't use them much either except to finish off something. Their playstyle doesn't really revolve around using their meter. The player, given what the focus of the bot is, can use their meter at full if they want to practice, and they can make it harder for themselves later by setting with less meter and trying to get the points while building the meter cleanly. But cleanly is a difficult thing to explain. So let's go into playbacks instead to explain from there. The first recorded action is relatively simple. Guile is intended to jab and then do his forward light kick like that. And then charge down back, basically. In this case, I'll make sure that it's clear what he does first. So even though he technically does not specifically do the light punch all the time, it's still in there. It's there to let him throw the slowest move. So the main purpose of this is to put in the bullet knee and a charge with a blade in front of it. It's slightly hard to put in because you have to understand how long before he goes to do this you actually have time. And as you can see, when there's already a fireball on the screen, he doesn't actually do the sonic blade at all, he just does the crouching medium kick. This makes no real difference because it's not useful for much, but it changes his rhythm so that he does other things. You can't do too much with just that. If you learn how to parry it or otherwise get through it, that's good for you. But he doesn't move forward in the way that a player who uses this sort of thing will be doing to annoy you. So we need number 2, and there you go. That's the main purpose of it. In fact, it's almost the entire purpose of it. It is a relatively instant air throw. However, as you can see, based on the timing that he uses for it and when the recording is ended, it is possible to have that throw not to be treated as an air throw. This happens when Guile's landing frames intersect with the timing of the throw itself. So he usually throws twice in this way. And you can delay it and move around some other things. This is relatively hard to input as well because learning the exact timing to make this work properly can be tricky. So we're looking at how it starts. As you can see, he really does just instantly jump and do this. There is a down back, but not much of one. This is probably the one that the bot does best without, but without it, it also has issues with timing other particular things. Fortunately, the main inputs you use, namely the throw itself and the timing for the throw itself, are probably going to be fine basically no matter how you put it in, unless you are really slow about the throw input itself at the beginning. You might mess up this part, but the throw itself will still be there for when it interacts with other actions. Action 3 is also, as you can see, quite simple. Turns Gal into a boxer. The forward light punch is required because it will allow him to continue throwing the slow booms. The back heavy punch is there specifically so that he uses his heavy punch in that way and you get to see it. This is actually somewhat of a frame trap if you're not familiar with it, especially since he walks away just long enough not to throw an actual boom, but to give you the impression that he might. The most important thing about this one is that it's used to create pressure once Gal has landed next to you, in the same spacing that the throw would have. Action 4 on the other hand is relatively simple as well. Though if you give it enough time, it will be quite confusing as to what it actually is. So let's look at it briefly. He is intending to throw booms after having pressed crouching light punch a certain number of times. Depending on where he is and whether or not the first one whiffs and a bunch of other things, you get that sort of spacing. So, the aim is to pressure you and then jump over your head, and that's where the other jumps come in. He's not specifically meant to jump over your head and hit you, even though he could do that with the light kick button. The final recording is simple. It is yet another forward light punch to throw yet another slow boom. This one simply has a forward medium kick hidden in that, and then the up forward for the jump. Note again that the jump does not actually contain any buttons. However, if you get his timing changed up, you start to see different things. So first of all, let's look at what happens when we turn on the Action 3 along with that, and Action 2 as well. Because this is the simple one that won't easily do the expected thing. He does walk backwards, and he does jump forwards, but he's not really much threat in this form. You can use this to get used to his movement and understand what you're looking out for, but these are not the key things that make the bot dangerous. He'll try to get over your head and you can get some points that way. By contrast, I can turn on just 1 and 4, and you'll get some fairly standard Gal pressure. Pull, throw a fireball, and jump. And depending on where you are in the fireball and his timing, he'll throw more blades, and then jump after them. The timing is not set such that you're likely to get hit by it. So this version also creates a very predictable timing and spacing and rhythm, one that is not very dangerous. These things are both important to see because it's very easy to get the impression that this bot doesn't specifically do anything. Because as you can see, the light kick you nearly never see, none of those other things matter. But once I turn everything on, his behavior changes relatively drastically while keeping those as its cores. Because now he's jumping over my head. And now he's also using the forward light kick. And finally, as you can see, his jumping heavy kick timing has changed such that I tend to actually have to block it. And that was the important thing. The interaction of various moves requires this situation to come up. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to learn much from it. Hitting him, obviously, like with most bots, also changes what will happen when he interacts with you. And, as you can see, it unlocks that, even though technically he's able to do that under very occasional conditions. So, what's your goal against this bot? Your goal is actually to punish that forward light kick, which is a -3 move, at most ranges that are closer to you, and not so much so when it's done further out. Beyond that, you're looking for a lot of defense, and finding some way to deal with that when he does it. So as you can see, if you just block to get through his stuff, he'll throw that boom, then he'll jump back, walk back, whatever. But now I'm getting hit, and he has combos now. He is a bot that is built to force you to have respect, which is why he is a little bit more technical than most. He's also just about repetitive enough to make you feel comfortable and then break that expectation heavily. So, your goals are to deal with that without just blocking it, to deal with that forward light kick without letting him get away. Basically, you have to actually punish if you can, or recognize that you cannot. And to deal with him when his jump specifically takes him over your head like that. But this forces you to watch every direction at once. This is a very heavy stress on most people's awareness. Especially when they are used to being able to take more action. Now obviously if you just decide to beat this bot up, most bots, as you know by now, if you're interested in Guilebot 2, you're quite aware that bots generally don't spend a lot of time making sure you can't beat them up. Guile is actually one of our stronger bots in that regard. He tends to be blocking a lot more often, simply by the nature of the character and the sort of things you need to do to have his moves ready. But, to get into what I'm actually supposed to be trying to do here, and how the bot is supposed to benefit you as a player, let's look at his tendencies. The bot is basically one that won't give you a lot of points unless you're paying a lot of attention. I'm too close there, so I can't get points from that. I should be able to get points from that, but I don't really know how to deal with that, which is an important skill to learn. And I got hit by that, and now I'm trapped again. It's easy to just counter him or get away from him, but getting your own points out of the deal is relatively difficult. So let's try to be more serious about him as a general character, and figure out what we can do. Well, since I'm not playing Bison and I have to deal with that, my usual thought is, maybe I can Inferno it out of my way. And maybe that'll protect me from Guile too. So let that be the first step of what I'm trying to do here. I'm going to try to use Medium Inferno to block the Sonic Blade, and just use Light Punch to poke him when he's going over my head like that, for now. Otherwise, I'm on defense again. As for that move, I need to use stand light kick. And to go into anything from there is kind of difficult. But sure. It's not too hard to do, maybe I can keep it up. So regular defense. This is not a point, but it's good to keep it in there mentally. Regular boom. Ah, I mistakenly jumped over my head. And I still didn't do anything. So as you can see, once you are defending properly, he is thankfully relatively predictable. But as you can guess, the hard version of the bot is mostly about getting points for just that forward light kick. But the bot is meant to be one where you will only see that forward light kick if the bot itself has not been allowed to just run its usual methods. You have to make that light kick happen, and then you have to react to it happening. Or, as you just saw, you might be in the wrong place altogether. And since you must react to it with a 3-frame move in an extremely short space of time, it can become quite difficult for you. Because it's much easier to just do stuff like that. But you got over my head again. It also teaches you a lot about cross-ups and the timings for certain moves to do anti-airs with. Because as much as we may dislike the anti-air jab as a concept, Bison doesn't really have another option. As you can see, if the opponent is likely to pass over your head, you have to be ready for the jump itself much earlier than you normally would have to be. In fact, technically, you can barely tell whether or not you were going to get the point or not on Bison, because by the time you recognize whether or not he would jump over your head, it's too late to hit the button to do anything about it. And since that does not work either, structurally you have to either air-to-air him, which doesn't necessarily feel like it's doing much, but you start to learn the ranges where he will pass over your head from the ground rather than by watching him in the air. But you also learn whether or not your anti-airs actually work on the situation in question. So now I know where he's standing here, and I know that I'm not in much danger. And I know that Guile stands still long enough while throwing a Sonic Boom to give me some idea of what I'm up against. So that's what you start to learn to watch as a result of this. And that's what you need in order to build up your skill in this matchup against the particular type of Guile who would give you trouble if they did this. You also learn to push back on his various moves, particularly the Sonic moves themselves. Because it's through controlling that pushback that Guile players are able to confuse and stress out other players. Right there, for example, I know what he's trying to do. I know what happens after the boom. here he moves slightly farther away from me, and I expect to see a jump, but the jump doesn't come, something else does. So you end up learning which buttons are available to you to use. If you're on a charged character, there might be differences in terms of how quickly you can hit an instant jump style button, because you might end up be doing a charge move instead, for example. And which of Guile's buttons, that he's likely to use in the air that is, actually do anything here. But at all times you are watching either for a move where he will go forward, and you have to get the point by making sure that he went forward in the timing you wanted. Like that. Or you're waiting for him to go over your head. And through observing this, you can learn how quickly you can get overwhelmed by what is supposedly a very simple character. If you somehow find yourself unable to break his defense, and whenever he can, he takes the opportunity to put on offense at his range on his terms. Now, as noted, let's compare this to CPU level 7 Guile. There's not a huge difference here, but you can notice it. I can defend against this much better because not only does it move more, it doesn't move in optimal ways most of the time. CPU Guile is not particularly good at simulating the situation you need to worry about, nor does it tend to have as strong a defense against aerial stuff, but that's fine. The problem being that if you had decided, okay, well, that's fine, I'm not going to jump in on this Guile anyway, how do you gain much from this? In fact, if you watch this difference, this Guile will basically never attempt to do a cross-up on you, seriously. Whereas, in the real game against people, Guile is not only very capable of doing it, it is actually a decent pressure option for him. So it's easy to get the wrong idea when it comes to like defending against him, especially if you have counter zoning tools. I could technically beat him just by dashing through these if I remembered exactly the timing for them. Admittedly, of course, I really do not remember the timing for that at all. However, it is still something that you could quickly gain within a couple tries and figure out how to handle him from there. That would be a matter of me practicing this for a couple of minutes, learning to identify where on the screen he has to be for me to get through the fireball sonic boom. And that would be it. I would spend some more time learning which ones did what to. but as he's usually either defending really hard or not at all. That's just a matter of quote-unquote downloading the bot. Well, downloading the CPU in this case. And just the fact that I'm spending this much time waiting on him to throw them and feeling no other threat whatsoever is kind of the problem. While there are definitely players that will do this, those players are not the players that you need this version of the bot for. And since he tends to move forward by jumping, there's actually a decently good reason why Guile is more likely to move forward by jumping, and therefore why the game, realistically, attempts to keep up this illusion. Guile can jump forward and then hold down back while in the air to be ready, whereas if he wanted to walk forward, he would not have this option. So yes, it is true that Guile is more likely to jump forward than not in those situations. But not that likely. And there's our first cross-up, and I doubt he meant to do it. And of course, we all know the flaw, where the CPU effectively does read your inputs provable under many circumstances, and you don't have to worry about a lot of stuff with that. So while I would love to learn to dash through every sonic boom, it wouldn't even be useful for me in real gaming because he would probably just flash kick after I did that twice. Now let's go back to the same playback recording and attempt the same perspective against it. I'm just going to say, okay, I'll just defend and wait for him to do something. He moves forward and backward. And I could hit buttons, especially those. I can definitely hit those against him. But if you aren't good with your timing, you'll get counter hit and more of these things will happen. So I'm going to demonstrate that by mostly trying to beat him by hitting crouch medium kick and going into stuff. Even if that was my only point system, this still is not as easy as it sounds. And originally, that seemed like a good idea, but this is effectively how you beat Guilebot 1.1. If you want to practice this, or you believe that this is the key to beating Guile and you are having success against Guiles, primarily by just finding your right spacing and doing that, by all means continue with that because it sounds as if things are working out well. But the CPU Guile is not as likely to just put obstacles in front of your movement to cause problems. So now let's refocus on the purpose of the bot and actually getting at least some points. Note that of course at this point the bot would technically be on easy, I'm getting points for everything. And that doesn't really change when it comes to Guilebot, because being such a simple character means that Guile tends to need help in terms of forcing you to not get all your points a particular way. Although you can obviously just do that. The difficulty in Guile is not usually, okay, survive longer because this particular thing is now the only thing you're doing. In Guile's case, it becomes survive longer because I have taken away some option you have, in this case meter. But right now, we're good. Right now, I have full meter of all kinds. I can do whatever I want. So I can try the same approach here. I can say, well, I'll deal with Sonic Blade by getting to it. When he's over there, I just wait. He might get closer to me. But then you end up focusing, and focusing is the problem. If I'm focused on the wrong thing for too long, I will lose my opportunities to get other things. If I'm focused on the wrong spacing for too long, I will actually take a little damage. Not usually a lot at once. But I'll count that as one. And I'll count that as two. But I immediately lost my focus on the ground game. I immediately lost my focus on the potential for the forward light kick because I was so busy thinking about that. And I started thinking about the forward light kick and missed the jump over. Guile's a character who, despite seeming very simple, is very, very good at making you focus so hard on one half of his gameplay that if the player finds the right timing to switch it up, you're likely to take at least, I would say, 20% health damage, which is fine normally, but this character is so hard to get in on for most people to begin with that him managing to do that 5 times is much more likely than you managing to do your equivalent. So you have to train your mind to react without thinking, just based on seeing that happen. He's a bot meant to train muscle memory, as many of our 2.0 bots are likely to be. Yes, they are likely to incorporate new V-triggers, new V-systems, and so on. But since most of the matchup knowledge is unlikely to be heavily changed by those things, it's very likely that the bots are going to end up being, this is how you keep this particular form of muscle memory up. This is how you make sure that you can have this reaction in time. I'm not going to give myself that one, although technically, at the easiest level, managing to hit him at all is a point. You don't have to combo off of it, especially if you have a special move, but technically, doing the special move is about as hard as doing the combo most of the time. So there I am, continuing to miss the moment where he jumps over my head. And if you fought Guile in that spacing, you know that that does happen to you. You are worried about getting hit with boom. You're worried about getting crouch, medium kick, or some similar thing. And then he jumps and you have to go, okay, ready. Can you go, okay, ready? Without learning to mentally prime yourself for that particular thing happening. And if you are priming yourself for that thing happening, are you also ready for all the other things that could be happening? Because once again I have dropped the punish for the bullet knee style. And then looking for that, I dropped the one for the jump over. So he's going to chip away at me eventually without me getting any actual points because I can't decide which of the two things he does I'm trying to manage. Moves like that give you a long time to react to them, relatively speaking. Jumps like that do not. And that is with a standing jab. That is with a quick way to do it. So from here I'm going to change character to demonstrate a separate part of the challenge of this.
Mysterious Code. Chun-Li.
And obviously at this point I'm switching to a character that I'm more familiar with. But whose ways of dealing with the situations in question are not that different. But as you can see, that doesn't specifically change the problem. Because the problem is not necessarily about familiarity with the character mechanically. It's with the muscle memory of doing the right thing in the right space of time. I have had more time, personally, obviously, to practice just hitting crouch light kick. And since I don't have to change the standing anymore, I would say that's the biggest difference between doing this with her and doing this with Bison. One, I don't have to press different buttons, and two, I don't have to change direction I'm holding on the pad or the stick in order to do what I'm doing. But here's another important factor that comes up if you have been working on it with Alex Bot at all. Even if you do choose to use a simple anti-air, like that, he normally lands so quickly or is so far down into his jump that even though he will reset out of it as if it's an air hit normally, you can't necessarily get anything off it. And if you try to hit it earlier so that you can get something off it, it's much easier for him to be missed entirely and end up behind you at advantage. This is actually true for many characters, but most characters have different forms of their jump, and they don't have quite as effective close range options when they've jumped completely over you that aren't stopped by something else. In order to open you up, they must do something specific, whereas with Guile, he does not usually have to try to open you up at all. He's not really trying to do it. He can also, as you've seen there, use buttons to make his jump ambiguous enough that you can't specifically tell what's supposed to happen. Particularly that same jumping instant air throw, which effectively turns into an empty jump, but you don't know which side of you he will end up on. Because he's changed his normal jump, which looks like a whole flip, where you see him turn completely in the air, into something else that is in no way as recognizable. His lower body does not go up as high, it's a different animation, and if your mind gets used to one, you can be tricked somewhat with the other. Fortunately, he does lose his trip guard when he does that, but a lot of the time you are more concerned about him hitting you with a jab or something after you blocked the wrong direction, if you were the type to continue to block. The last part of this that is interesting and somewhat difficult is that most of the time if you are using a quick 3-frame normal, if you have anything of that sort available to your character in the first place, or a throw that of a particular type, the amount of time you have to input this and confirm that it worked properly is among the lowest in the game. Because most of the time when we do confirms off of moves that are very close to safe but not safe, the move itself is actually relatively long, or it isn't the sort of move that we care about doing that too. For example, this is -2. It takes quite a long time in both block stun and the actual execution of the move itself. If you for some reason felt the need to punish that, or with Cammie's crouch medium kick for example, which actually is -3, and she was super close to you, you have enough time to recognize what's going on and quote-unquote mash the button. But Guile's movements tend to be at least somewhat misleading for those who have not played against the character a lot, which is why we needed to give it. Also, it is harder to do your combos under that amount of stress. Again, I'm not really demonstrating this well because I have a bit more experience doing this combo, but also bear in mind that even if you do succeed at hitting the right button, you might not always want to confirm the fact that you did it, because from a certain range, that move becomes closer to safe or plus entirely, because of which active frame of it you get hit by. So in a way, you are looking for both a hit confirm and an air reset to confirm on a lot of stuff that is happening with this bot. Did you do the move correctly? Did he end up at the spacing you expected? And can you now finish it with whatever you wanted to finish it with? Or did you get the jitters and mess up somewhere and then have to decide, okay, I'm stopping? While all of this is going on, you're facing your normal problem, namely a Guile that is jumping at you, who you are supposed to get points off of by him doing so. And this is part of the reason why so much of what he does is based on jabs, is to make you as uncomfortable as possible with hitting buttons that are not well timed. You do not have the luxury of hitting buttons that quote-unquote don't work. So right now, I can make this mentally difficult for myself again, in a way that I was not doing before. I basically before took off the limiter that told me, okay, you must actually confirm that the crouching light kick hit him before going into legs. I basically stopped caring if it didn't, in order to show off the combo itself and get more stuff done. But now, I can go back to doing that, and since I haven't practiced quite that much, it becomes harder to do the confirm because I have to be really sure he was close enough, I have to be sure that I did everything right, and I have to be expecting the move. And by expecting that move, he gets to do a ton of chip damage if he happens to just not feel like doing it. There are other points here I could have gotten, but because I'm waiting for that, and using that specific timing of when this move comes out I will be ready, I've sacrificed a lot of the rest of my game plan in order to succeed. And a good opponent will pick up on that and pressure you with it. So as soon as you notice that I'm trying to get the points by him jumping over, when he occasionally does that, the timing is a little bit off. It's not quite perfect enough anymore. It is thinking about and approaching the bot in this way that you must do in order to get most of your benefit from it. He does have a flash kick in there, mostly to be cathartic, for when you're tired of being on edge all the time and tense about one thing or another. For you to just be able to use that to let off some steam by hitting with a big crush counter. The other thing you are usually supposed to do is to figure out whether or not you can use the jump over timing or spacing to create something you can't normally do. Chun-Li is a character who is very good at this. Ibuki is another character who is very good at this. There are moves that don't seem as if they should do the job, but because the character aiming to jump over you must follow certain rules in terms of timing, you can keep yourself a lot safer or out of the pressure in a different way altogether. Usually in ways your opponent won't expect as much. But as you can see, the bot is going to block most of that, so you do get to see whether or not that is a useful thing to you in general, because he should be blocking enough for you to get a clear idea of what is going on. If the move is fast enough, the opponent has pressed anything in the air, etc. All of those things combine to decide whether or not what you're doing is a good idea. But again, no, mainly that happens more so because he loses his trip guard. Which is fine because, technically, anyone jumping with a light kick will also lose their trip guard. The general aim is to block the light kick and then hit him with a rounding quick normal. And that is partly why the throw is in there. The throw is in there so that even if that is your general approach to Guilebot, you still have a chance of getting some points that way. He also has one or two other buttons that tend to come into it, but the idea is to basically show you, how long do I have to do the trip guard thing if he happens to do a move that I block? Because normally when Guile does it with the jumping light kick, he is actually not plus enough to get away with a lot. This is something that is in general true for people who jump to cross up with light buttons and fail. They can clip you with throws, they can sometimes do their shortest normal, but most of the time, you have a little bit of time to press it through with your own. And finally, of course, the recognition that your opponent was in the wrong place, they went over your head, they jumped over you from too far away. You could block, and if you have the good timing for the block, you'll get it right. Unfortunately for most people, that means that you have to hold forward at the moment it happens. So that is another thing to train with the bot when you have a chance. That in order to successfully do the blocking part of it, you will in fact have to walk, basically, at that moment. So let's move to doing this with an unfamiliar character altogether. And we'll have a change of scenery at the same time. So with Cammy, I have a relatively easier time with this overall. Although I have not played her since, like, Alpha 2 and I have no idea what. Everything I know about Cammy in this game is from working with Cammy players, but not specifically playing her myself. However, the core principles are still more or less the same. I need my 3-frame normal, or 3-frame move, and I need to react a certain way when the opponent gets over. The problem with doing this sort of thing with a completely unfamiliar character is obviously that your muscle memory is off, first of all, but the way you have learned to focus your other character to do something ties into that even further. Because that is what we're aiming for in this case. It's actually supposed to be, as far as I remember from her trials, crouch light punch, crouch light kick, cannon spike. I have done that trial, I'm terrible at that. You can also, of course, use this to solve your problems with overcommitting to certain moves. Or you could just not bother getting rid of that particular thing at all. It is also a good way to train yourself to go down forward for certain things early on into a punish in order to prevent certain things from happening. But the game is a little bit too lenient on certain inputs these days, and it prevents that from being a viable strategy for everyone. That said, Cammy actually can just do that, or if you know what you're doing and can get the reversal timing off for that, just hit those buttons. The leniency is overall a good thing, though. You just have to learn how to choose the way that your character is going to use it to your advantage, rather than specifically telling yourself this is how it should work, because no fighting game has ever been like that. And I say that as a person who's played many fighting games over many years. But let's now go into making sure that I can do something in response to that without overdoing it. So we're going to ignore the aerial movement altogether for a while, other than to block it, and just try to do stuff to that. If you're familiar with her crouch light kick, it isn't going to work because it is 4 frames. And you will see overall, it's about the same as the buffer for Alpha 2 actually, if you're aware of it. Because in Alpha 2 and games like that, it had to be lenient on how quickly you could do a super. Because a super was something that you had to be able to do to use your meter at all. There was no EX move. Yet the motion was the same as in this game. So if you wanted to use your meter to defend yourself, you had to be able to do that as a punish. So Capcom Code is fairly heavily built on you being able to do that without dying. Given that many moves that were similar or shared the input with the super were much less safe and much less of a good idea to do. So it was, if you had the meter, which you usually did, because again, supers only costed 1 bar at that time, this is what we're going to let you do because you have the meter. And it's been that way up until Capcom vs SNK 2 basically. It's only basically in Street Fighter 4 where we started to have to be able to do things with EX which involved hitting 2 buttons rather than doing the entire motion twice. That leniency started to become the primary problem rather than the secondary one. Well, technically, I suppose it was in Street Fighter 3, but that didn't really count given how you used to use your supers in Street Fighter 3. And the fact that for most Street Fighter 3 supers, the bar was... you basically used half a bar to do the ES move, but the ES move wasn't given enough priority anyway, so it didn't matter. But you should also note that the leniency that the game is giving, in this case, for this particular move, and the moves that you are dealing with, are not based on how you were supposed to block the move. They're based on how you use defense in the game in general, namely holding down back. Which means that anyone with much Street Fighter experience can actually do the Shoryuken motion from down back and have no problem. If you cannot do the Shoryuken motion from down back, you're going to have a lot of problems playing other games. Because KOF, Guilty Gear, games like that, they basically don't allow you to not do it. All that happens is that those games tend to have different motions for their supers, so you don't have to worry so much about the speed of it. So you end up getting into bad habits in Street Fighter if you play characters in those games who don't have the same double forward style super. But as you can see, to me, this is not actually hard to do because I've been playing since, again, Alpha 2. And you have to be able to decide, do I want to do a Shoryuken or not at that point. However, I definitely am aware that for newer players and players who only spent a certain amount of time with newer forms of Street Fighter, and possibly certain people who played since Super Turbo because of a particular way that Super Turbo used to work, would generally have more trouble with this. Namely because Super Turbo doesn't have a super meter you can loop out. Since this becomes mostly a problem when you have full meter though, it's not something you particularly care about in this matchup. So actually, by talking more, I'm getting pushed back to my old habits from Alpha 2 days. And getting back used to Kami again, basically. It restores the ability to just cannon spike from down back with no issue. Without supering, as you can note, because the meter is clearly on. If I was going to super, I would probably have been doing all the things I was doing before. The other form of the input leniency you can use if you are a stronger proponent of the Street Fighter 4 style is to never go to forward at all. If you are the sort of person who knows how to wiggle the controller from the days of that game, a particular input will usually give you the cannon spike and that sort of thing without actually having the skill to do the proper DP motion. It was a large section of the controversy back then that, oh, they were making the inputs easy and so forth, but use whatever you can to do it. And the reason I'm going into this in such detail is because this is a part of it that is super important. As I mentioned from the beginning, this bot is about teaching you muscle memory. It's about teaching you to execute a particular thing in a very, very short space of time, and with very minimal visual cues to do the thing in question. So you have to find your own way of making sure this works for you as quickly as you can. Because a lot of this game's execution is like that. If you go too far in one direction, if you're not using an arcade stick, if you are a sloppy player, or are used to games where the game's leniency is based around meters you don't have as often, such as Street Fighter 4, you have to learn how to make sure that that doesn't happen to you by figuring out to clean up your inputs. Fortunately, there is not much need for this going forward in terms of the newer games coming out. Tekken and so on don't have that issue. Dragon Ball Fighters will not have that issue, etc. So when you use this bot, please make sure to make your effort about understanding how you input things. Especially if you're relatively a beginner. Because beginners tend to have a tendency to put in moves where their mental state for the right and left half of the input, i.e. the D-pad and the controls, are separate. Because it is easier for most people, depending on the size of their hand and the way their thumbs work, to put in certain inputs correctly or not correctly. And since these bots are for people who are relatively new to the game, relatively new to this style of game, if you are having, for example, any issues with Kami trials at all, you're better off going there to practice doing certain ones than starting on the bot itself, because you have to find the trick to do it. That said, if you use the inputs in the trial against the bot and find that you can't do it, you should check whether or not that is because you get more stress under situations where you are under high pressure or don't feel as if you have enough time to do what you're trying to do normally. For example, what just happened there was a matter of, I don't specifically know that combo. I don't know what the timing I need to use to go to the down forward on the crouch like kick and still manage to do the rest of it. So now I have to specifically spend a little time learning that. But I'm not trying to just learn that, because if I just want to learn that, then okay, fine. I'm relaxed right now, I can hit this button whenever I want. But now, I have to think about all of the things he's doing, what I'm supposed to do. And still do it. Which for a person whose first game was Street Fighter V, or who's only came in at the end of Ultra or didn't play all that seriously in certain things. Or if you're coming from Injustice where the whole thing is completely different because of which buttons you have to hold to block and so on. I can't imagine not being driven crazy by this if as an Injustice player whose entire way of avoiding left-right mix-ups is to hold straight down. But if you are a player who is familiar with how to play any specific fighting game, you are probably aware of how to teach yourself to do your inputs in a particular way. And for everyone, that way tends to be different. So in my case, I'm pretty sure if I want to do that into Spike, I have to do the input leniency version. I basically have to do the Street Fighter 4 version. I want to call it the Street Fighter 5 version, but you tend to give such things based on which game they started in. And as you can see, if you go too close to forward, weird things happen, you get the wrong move. Can't afford to do it that way at all. And you'll die like that. So while these bots are mostly meant for people who are not too serious, not too professional, not dropping $150 on an arcade stick in order to play it, you do also have to understand that things that are considered difficult on one are slightly different, even though overall it probably balances out. There we go, that's a bit closer, but not there yet. But now I'm focused on doing that, and not focused on the precise timing that I need to do it in. This is what you're using this bot for, and that is why we are not pushing the CPU to do it. Why no other bot specifically is set to do it. Honestly, it's actually fairly hard to find characters with a -3 move that is worth you trying to punish with quick close buttons. It's not a common thing in this game. There are definitely -3 moves where your opponent could stand far too close and do the wrong thing. But there are not a lot of moves where your opponent has specifically brought themselves closer to you with a -3 move, and it is in your best interest to actually attempt to punish. So, gotta get selected, he wasn't doing too much else, I think. As for dealing with his Sonic Blade, Cammy fortunately has a much easier solution to that, which is why I haven't really been bothering to do it. Having the meter gives Cammy lots of options for this. Being able to do that also gives Cammy lots of options for this. Her particular form of the anti-air jab is a lot easier. On the other hand, if you wanted to learn to punish Guile jumping over you with crosscut DP, this is also for that purpose. It is to teach you more or less advanced Dragon Punch inputs one way or the other. But, well, good luck. A crosscut DP feels a lot more like a King of Fighters Super though, so you can get used to doing it that way. Unfortunately, if you do it wrong, it will come out like that, just as it pretty much always has. Once again, a problem that comes more or less from Alpha 2, but back then it was good. So, if you have a character that does this sort of thing, that needs to be able to do a very quick input in order to punish a 3-frame move, or has to worry about the way that they confirm the combo off their 3-frame button, that is basically the purpose that this bot is supposed to help you with. And when I say confirm, I do not specifically mean confirming the light itself, because it is the opinion of many players that reliably actually confirming off lights is hard. But in the case of this bot, and in the case of Guile, you're not so much confirming that it will work. You are making sure that your own input skill is enough so that under almost all circumstances it will punish because the frames didn't change. And then you're learning to confirm the way you were hit and the spacing you were hit at. For example, right there, I did not try anything because Guile was too far away. I was no longer responding to the knee itself, but I respond instead to the idea that he is now close enough to me after the knee for me to use my 3-frame normal and do what I'm trying to do. So even though I'm talking about confirms, I'm not talking about specifically confirming the light punch into anything. I'm talking about confirming from the time that Guile does the move that I want to punish, that he was at the range at which I can definitely punish it. A regular confirm is more about when the opponent has the option to block, but you manage to open them up and they did not in fact block. Or you frame trapped them in some way, or you tricked them in some way. This sort of confirm is a lot more about knowing that you definitely can punish them, or that is so borderline that you're willing to risk it, versus them being at a range where you are likely to either end up getting blocked and therefore shouldn't finish your combo, or should never do anything, although that is generally not in your favor. So in the case of Guile, you should almost always hit the button, especially depending on if your character has a fairly decent longer range button. But knowing what to follow that button with is a different matter. You will over time learn the range at which Guile can make that move, plus it's not anywhere near where you think it is naturally. Or maybe it is, depending on what your thinking is. But he has to be fairly far out before that move is plus when he does it. The bot is given that ability to do it from there, but the move is rare enough that he's not likely to do it from there. So you can spend most of your time learning to punish it that way. The regular way, basically. But right about there, if he would do that instead of jumping, around that spot, he has the potential to make it that way. Well, he was nice enough to do it at the very beginning of the round, which shows basically the spacing. He can reach with it from that spacing, and at that spacing you have to be a little careful. You can also try moving back to that space yourself, but it can be a little complicated. However, when you fighting Guile who does this style, their aim is going to be constantly to move themselves to that space, and you have to make sure that they don't quite get away with that as easily as they want to. One easy way is mostly to figure out when they are unlikely to throw their boom and walk forward immediately, just a tiny bit right then, and learn how to do that. But unfortunately I put the heavy punch in here to deter you from doing that. Guile is quite the tank. He has a lot of structured normals that lead to a cohesive fighting style, in that you can't necessarily take anything for granted with him. You can also of course walk back, which can cause him to whiff the move entirely, but honestly a lot of the time, your opponent seeing you walking back instead of crouch blocking, it's just an excuse for them to throw another sonic boom. The final note is this exactly that sort of thing. Certain characters have moves that are technically projectile invincible, but because of the way that Guile throws his boom, particularly Sonic Blade, and the speed at which it moves, you can often find that that projectile invincibility is not saving you from things. Lara, to some extent Zangief, Ryu, Ken, well no, not really Ken tends to go over completely, Akuma. There are a lot of characters who you would normally feel, okay, I can get through fireballs, this is not a big deal to me. But you can hit Guile, and if you move too early into the Sonic Blade, you end up getting hit yourself. Which would be fine except for the fact that Guile has now hit you with Sonic Blade. I can tell you that in almost every situation this is to his advantage. And if you move too early, there's that problem too. Which is why the bot recording was set up in the way it was, where he does have the option to just not throw the boom. It's about a quarter chance where he won't do it, but he does have the option to just not do it. So for the final part of this bot showcase, I'm going to switch back to Bison. And attempt to take advantage of what I was talking about at the beginning. And give the final piece of advice that will matter or require you to change the bot in some way in order to make it more realistic so that you can't get away with the thing that I'm about to tell you not to do. When you are playing against this bot, you basically should make sure not to spend a lot of time walking backwards. Unless you know that you're not going to get hit with like crouch medium kick or something. I did not give this bot a crouch medium kick. I can't think of a specific good place that it should go. If you have any suggestions, of course, as always, hit us up at 2-mk.org and let me know where, especially if you try it out and figure out where it should go. Feel free to help everyone out and send me the data through the contact page there, and we will add it and we will update the bot to 2.1 and everyone will have much more use with it. But overall, if you spend a lot of time with a bot just walking back from him, especially on a character whose 3-frame normal is a standing normal, you are making yourself, you're losing your own effort here because he doesn't do lows as is. So he will almost always be able to get away with nothing whatsoever. You will be allowed to change the spacing. You will also block his crouch light punch. You will get away from anything that isn't proximity block on boom. And you will reposition a bunch of things. Whether or not you can get points this way is a different matter, but generally he spends enough time close to you that you risk being swept. And you shouldn't do that to yourself. Do not build a habit on this bot that is going to fail you later. Normally, as I said, I'll try to make sure that the bot punishes you for anything that you shouldn't be learning from it. But there doesn't seem to be a good spacing for this here, and there are many other bots that teach you not to do that. Guilebot 1.0 included. But that means that you have to learn the final skill. That is to go from down back to your standing normal in the space of time it takes to recognize the move that just happened. And for certain charge characters, that is very stressful. Fortunately, most of the characters who are able to do this are either not charged characters or don't have a free frame run to do it with in the first place. And they're usually worried about something more like being able to do their command throw from down back in the face of time required. There will be no version of this bot directly that spends a lot of time jumping after that move, but you can easily make one. It's also obviously, of course, useful for learning to get over very slow moves in the first place. You can overall see the effectiveness of that particular tactic as a thing. Unfortunately, as noted, I spent so much time focused on waiting for the bullet knee. I keep on calling it that, but I'm pretty sure that's not what it's called for him specifically. Though I'm pretty sure all commentary now calls it that regard. And I started focusing on that and therefore flipped. But bots are, of course, completely designed and intended for you to be able to spend hours with them without easily overcoming them. And if you cannot easily overcome them, then you probably don't have the problems that would bring you to use it in the first place. Of course, I will note that, for the most part, despite all that, you can be relatively sure that the bot is not going to jump except after doing a crouching light punch or a sonic boom. He's not generally able to jump after pretty much anything because the timing for his jumps is tied to something else. Your mileage may vary depending on the way the recording is done on your side, but nevertheless, given where the intended jumps are, he should still have some clear pattern that you can put to use in terms of learning how to deal with it. So it's mostly a question of breaking down whether he jumped or not, and what, if anything, you need to do about that. As always, Guilebot will be available on Sunday at the usual time at 2-mk.org/bots. Make sure to look at the page specifically clearly because this will technically count as an advanced bot, even though Guilebot 1.0 is a moderate bot and is not. It basically will have a separate section, a separate way of looking at it, and its own page entirely. So if you do not see it when you go to the Guilebot page, please make sure that you're looking at the correct one. That said, have a good evening everyone, enjoy Southeast Asia Majors, and look out for Zaku's announcement trailer. If they actually end up releasing Zaku's on the Tuesday after the trailer. I think they've done this recently. Then I will see what scramble I can do to get you Guilebot next week rather than 2 weeks, but no promises. You will definitely be able to see him online and on stream once that update is done. And obviously one of the 2 things that we normally do on those days, open mic will probably still be on Tuesday, depending on the overall flow, but one of the other 3 segments is very likely to be replaced with some sort of lounge or work with the bot itself concept. Or maybe 1 or 2 streams showing it off if I happen to get it done very easily. Manat turned out to be a much easier bot than I thought it was going to be, for example. So since I'm now totally autopiloting against this guy, I hope you enjoyed this guidance today. And you can let us know whether or not you found it useful. This is Rillian from Amara2_MK. Bidding everyone good night.